Welcome to Andy Ari On3, presented by Wendy's, your instant reaction to 8 overtimes between Georgia and Georgia Tech. Ari, holy crap. Holy freaking crap.
Andy, we got to stop these Europeans. I'm just saying.
Well, it's penalty kicks. Yeah, it wasn't even football at the end.
Yeah.
Not football.
Like, I don't know what this beans with breakfast thing is, but they don't need to infiltrate our sport. That was at the same time electric. I mean, like,
well, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, people were, I was jumping up and down. It didn't matter who did what. Like, it was just whatever happened. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. I was just absolutely dumbfounded by that entire game. And like, there are two ways this conversation can go. Like, we can have a real conversation about Georgia, what this means for the SEC championship after they just got done playing 2 full football games, basically. Or we could talk about the grab ass, or we could do both. But like,
well, I think we should do both.
Like, Georgia Tech just had no 2-point conversion plays, which may be the reason why.
They did have the one where they had the offensive line off to the left.
And
they got a pass interference penalty out of that one.
Like buzzing off of the game.
You said buzz.
I can't remember. Like, how many times did the overtime advance because neither team got it? Was that like 5 of them?
They both got it once.
Or was it like 7 of them?
It was 6 of them.
6 of them.
They both got it once. Neither of them got it 6 times. And Georgia got it the last one, and Georgia Tech didn't.
Yeah. So I really, really am torn with this, Andy, because I like how exciting and fun that was. But I also am not satisfied by how that game was decided, because it wasn't decided by playing football.
Well,
so, I mean, I don't know if people care about that right now.
Well, I remember watching the game that caused the rules to change, that Texas A&M LSU 7 overtime game.
Was that like 5 years ago now?
It was more than that.
Yeah.
And it was Coach O was coaching LSU. It was early in the Coach O tenure.
Yeah.
And that one, like, if you have that, and then Georgia advances to the SEC championship game, and let's say Georgia Tech was playing in the ACC championship game, they'd both lose because of that, if you had them playing essentially 2 full games.
Yeah, yeah. And in previous formats, too, with the playoff, that could have been a detriment. But, like, the Georgia Bulldogs won. Now, the game, if they would have lost, wouldn't have technically done anything to them had they won the SEC championship the following week.
But I think it would have made it a win in, lose and out situation for Georgia.
Yeah.
Now it depends on if Texas or Texas A&M wins who they play. But I remember seeing in the first half of the Georgia Tech Georgia game, they had the all-state playoff predictor, however that's decided, and it said Georgia still had a 97% chance of making the playoff if it lost tonight and lost the SEC championship game, or maybe it was 79%. I don't think that would have happened. I think they would have been out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that math is European math. I don't know how
I do think they're probably in now, win or lose, probably, but I don't think it's a guarantee.
Probably still in, win or lose. I don't know. Let's just get into it. Okay. So I wrote a column. You edited it. It's not on the internet right now because it needs to be reworded a little bit because Georgia ended up winning. But does this make you
taste of how the sausage is made?
There? Yeah. I mean, it looked like for the entirety of that game that Georgia was going to lose. And, frankly speaking, had Haynes King not got spearheaded,
let's
turn the ball.
Let's talk about that. Michael Morgan asked, can someone explain to me how targeting wasn't even looked at on the fumble? Targeting was looked at because they reviewed the fumble to make sure it was a fumble. At any point during that, if they thought targeting had happened, they would have said, we're reviewing this for targeting. And they would have ejected Dan Jackson for targeting.
Well, yeah. Well, nobody knows what targeting is anymore. But if you do know what it is, it looks a lot like what we saw on there. I mean, like
from the angle you saw, his helmet comes in. Haynes King looks like he's hitting the face mask. It pops up, and so that was. And everybody's like, it's an SEC crew. They're obviously biased. I will point out the referee in this game. Yes, it's an SEC crew. Worked for the ACC. For a lot of years before this year.
I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
Rabbit hole. Like,
this crew,
get out of here.
This crew also worked the Georgia Ole Miss game, which did not go particularly well for Georgia.
Yeah. I don't know if there's people out there that believe that the refs are predetermined to screw.
There was the holding call they absolutely missed.
They missed the holding call on the game tying Georgia touchdown drive. That was like somebody ripped somebody's arm out of their socket.
Yeah,
Like,
it was a
pretty-
clear hold. Yeah.
It was a hold. And then the targeting thing was definitely, but Georgia came back and won the game. Okay. But for the most part of the game,
Buckeyes says Andy won't even admit clear target. I saw one angle of it. We never saw another angle of it.
yeah, the one angle of it looked like, again,
I will say a bad job by the ESPN crew not even exploring that.
yeah. I mean,
They were too busy saying if Georgia won, they were in the playoff.
it was the talk of X
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
And we were in my living room talking about it like, what the hell was that? So, I mean, we're acknowledging that. I'm not going to say that Georgia only won because of
I said it
but,
when
like,
it happened. I said it when I saw the
first thing that you
play.
said when we saw it. So, but from a competitive standpoint, we're talking about a Georgia team that was an 18.5-point favorite. They came in, and for the majority of that football game, I think we could say that they were just physically being beaten by Georgia, right? Or Georgia Tech.
By Georgia Tech, yes.
So they come back, they win. This team has been resilient this year. Even the Alabama game, they were getting blown off the field, and they came back and took a lead even on the road. They deserve credit for winning the game because at the end of the day, all that matters is winning or losing. They didn't lose. But does this impact your viewpoint at all about the SEC, how it's being framed in the college football playoff race?
Yes.
And okay, so you're starting to be with me on this a little bit.
I'm not starting to be. I've been with
Yeah,
you for a lot of
okay.
the season.
So, like my saucy take in week 5 was the 2 best teams in the country are in the Big Ten, and I think that's aging pretty well. I think the 2 best teams are in the Big Ten, but the thing that I'm interested in is, 8 days ago, we were having a legitimate conversation, and I was fully on board with it. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I've been like above the SEC hype.
No, you were all in on Ole Miss 8 days ago.
Yeah, like I was all in, and like I still struggle with it, Andy, because like if you were like,
yeah, your Mr. Stars matter.
if your life depends on Ole Miss playing Arizona State, who would you pick? Like I would pick Ole Miss. Like I have a brain, and I've been with you people for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Like I there's been no argument. They have unequivocally been the best conference in college football for the past 20 years. We have all the titles, all the recruiting, all the draft picks, all the things that made them so great.
Right.
I'm not denying that they
But
were
here's the
always
thing.
overrated.
Georgia Tech is not an ACC championship team.
No.
They are a team that has now lost 5 games. They came into this with 4 losses.
Yeah.
They were not going to the ACC championship game. So you can't say, well, if Georgia played an ACC schedule, you would run into a Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
You would run into a Miami. You would run into an SMU.
You can't say that right now.
Yeah.
So like for me, it's kind of I've got to
and that Florida team that Georgia struggled with, Miami blew off the field.
Yeah.
On its, on the road.
So like all of these SEC talking points though about talent and draft picks were like my playbook for 20
I know.
years.
It's hard,
like,
right?
So like I'm having a hard time with it. Like it's like, yeah.
The good news is you still have Ohio State and Oregon.
Yeah, I mean Ohio State and Oregon for the time being are doing okay. It's midnight almost. It is on the East Coast, and the Michigan game hasn't happened yet. So, there's plenty of grab ass that could still be ahead for us in the next 24 hours. But I have to come to terms with the fact that there is no empirical evidence from what we've seen on the field this year.
Right.
That's it.
Most years, the SEC has some non-conference wins where you're like, oh, well, that explains everything.
They do have Georgia over Clemson, and Clemson, funny enough, is like a fringe playoff team.
Well,
so, like,
and we're going to get Clemson, South Carolina tomorrow to help parse that a little bit.
But the thing that I'm struggling with is when we had that conversation 8 days ago, and I was like, yeah, bet Ole Miss to win the national title 11-1. Like, there's no running away from that. And I still have a hard time even writing the words because I'm so ingrained into expecting that it's Ohio State and the SEC because those are the only teams that have recruited and accumulated talent at that level. But if we are going to actually break down the sport in 2024, where the previous era does not play a part in how we analyze it, and we are flattened of the curve and teams are closer than they've ever been, we have to acknowledge that beating Alabama and beating Georgia does not mean the same thing right now as it did in 2020.
It doesn't.
So you can't have 5 teams or 6 teams in the SEC with their entire resumes bolstered by wins over Alabama and Georgia when it becomes more and more evident every single week that those teams are not those teams anymore. They are on their helmet, but those teams are not as deep as they used to be.
Alabama just went and lost by 3 touchdowns to a bad Oklahoma
and like
team.
Tennessee's entire playoff resume, and I'm not isolating Tennessee, it's just the first example that came to my head, is bolstered by beating Alabama. And it's like, what does that actually mean? So as we're going through this playoff discourse for the next 10 days, and we go through and get more context on Saturday and then championship weekend the following weekend, the question has to be asked, like, is SEC a 5-bid league? Like, in my mind, it's not.
Well, I don't think it's in anybody's mind.
Yeah, but it was a week ago. So, and there are still people.
Now, here's the thing about this, though. The SEC is going to get 3 teams, maybe 4 teams in.
I don't think it's a 4-team league.
Whatever. They'll get 3 or 4. That will happen. One of those 2 things will happen. And if they win a bunch of games in the playoff, then they win a bunch of games in the playoff.
And they still might.
Right.
I'm not saying that they can't. Like, if Georgia plays its best football, which we've seen for all of 5 quarters this year, they can beat anybody in the country. I would not go to bed in shock if they beat Oregon or Ohio State.
If Miami beats Syracuse tomorrow, you feel better about the ACC as a 2-bid league?
I think they absolutely should be a 2-bid league. I don't think that I don't need to reserve a spot for Alabama in this playoff. To me, Alabama is not.
I don't think they would be. I don't even think Alabama's in the.
But I don't need to reserve a spot
in the conversation
for Ole Miss.
on that.
I don't need to reserve a spot for South Carolina. I don't need to reserve a spot for any of these teams. You could say, well, what would SMU do with an SEC schedule? And we could sit here and say, yeah, they probably lose 3 or 4 games. And even if we think they would, we don't know that anymore.
Yeah,
we used to know that. That's the thing. We just don't know.
And it's okay. That's great. They're going to play. The SEC is going to get teams into the playoff, and if the SEC teams dominate in the playoff, teams that we thought were better than them, then we'll have an answer.
Do you think that Arizona State could beat Ole Miss
on the right day?
Because that's the.
I watched Florida beat Ole Miss last week in person.
Yeah,
so,
it's but how good do we think? Because Arizona State is behind all those teams in the polls with 1 fewer loss, and the reason why they are behind them is because they're
perceived to play a weaker schedule.
They are perceived to be inferior. And in the past, I was all about the perception because we had hard data and roster numbers to back up those perceptions. But if we don't have them anymore, then we certainly can't fall back on them right now.
Well,
and that's the whole thing for me. It's is the SEC the best conference in America? I think you could make the case that maybe it is. The only thing I'm trying to get across is that you cannot say it factually anymore. You could 3 years ago. You cannot say it factually anymore.
And it's okay. Now it's just an argument. And people are still going to love having the argument all week.
Yeah.
In Dennis 133, we do need to point this out.
Okay.
Sucks that Georgia Tech lost, but recruiting is improving. This is just the beginning of them building. I think Brent Key has done a tremendous job.
Yeah.
We do need to give Brent Key his flowers because he has turned, think about when he took over that program, when Jeff Collins got fired, Brent Key was the interim guy. He had to fix the punt team the first week, because they kept getting punts blocked. They're a legitimate tough out. They have a huge win against Miami this year. I do think they're going to get better if he keeps coaching them.
And Haynes King played his ass off.
Now, Buster Faulkner, I don't know if they're going to be able to keep him because with all these OC jobs that are going to be open, Buster Faulkner is going to be the belle of the ball once all the hiring opens up.
Yeah, and the thing that you have to say too is that Georgia Tech played a very physical game. I thought they did a really good job drawing up plays. They got people open. That tight end played his ass off.
Yeah,
King played his ass off. That was a 4-quarter plus game that they were in it every step of the way. So but that's the thing. It's if we're at the point of give Georgia Tech credit mode, I'm all for it. But we're not giving Georgia Tech credit 5 years ago in this game. They're getting their ass kicked.
Right.
And maybe they're better.
And so last year they played Georgia to within 8 points.
Yeah.
And I think that was a better Georgia team than this team. And this year they played them to 8 overtimes because Georgia Tech is better than last year's Georgia Tech was, and Georgia is worse than last year's Georgia was.
And now it's making me rethink, we've been just saying all week, South Carolina is going to beat the crap out of Clemson. Are we sure?
We don't know.
About that?
We don't know.
That's so.
I still think South Carolina is going to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they will too.
But the line never flipped. It's still Clemson as a 2.5-point favorite.
Perception of it is worth as much as everyone else's perception of it. I could say with a straight face 2 years ago, who was going to? I could have told you in week 0. One of the 4 teams that would win the national championship. And for the previous 10 years, I was right every time. It sucks, but also awesome that I can't do that anymore. I can't do it right
and that's
now.
That's the thing where I think people think we're bemoaning this. This is not a bad thing. This is good for the sport. This makes everything more interesting. It makes the playoff more interesting. Believe me, fans of SEC schools, it will make it more interesting if SEC teams win in the playoff because then you can say, told you. If that happens. If it doesn't happen, then the other fan bases are going to be told you.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll get to use the playoff actually instead of meaningless bowls to actually keep score of that stuff. But there is a reason to keep score. There's a reason to keep score. So
yeah. So, Onakuno, so you're telling me my pitch for a 7-win Oklahoma team with wins over Bama and possibly LSU to make the playoff holds no water. I am so sorry. I am sorry. That would be a hot finish to the season, though.
yeah, and I bet you there would be quite a few SEC fans out there that would be like, hey, he's got a point.
Yeah.
Like the dismissal of losses for SEC schools because they lost the teams that we're finding out are average is just humorous to me. Humorous.
Well, and that's the thing. They're not, the gap is different. And you can say it's because, however you want to explain it away, whether the middle and the bottom of the SEC are better because of NIL and transfer portal, whether everybody's better and the top of the SEC is just not as good, because it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is there aren't super teams sitting atop the SEC anymore. There just aren't.
Yeah. And, maybe we'll find out there aren't super teams in the Big Ten or anywhere else for that matter. And here's the thing. If I had to pick a national champion right now, I would feel pretty confident in saying it'd be Ohio State or Oregon at the moment, but nowhere near as confident as it would be to say Ohio State, Alabama, or Georgia before the year 3 years ago. So we were going into a playoff system.
We've got to, I don't know if we need to do electroshock treatment on you.
No, it's hard.
We have to get you out of the mindset of this team signed X many 5-stars more than this. If you work your roster through the portal, it doesn't matter how many 5-stars you signed. It matters how many good players you have right now.
Yeah. And I'll give Doug Lesmerises credit for this because he's somebody, he talked about this and I was listening to it, 18 months ago. But from the Stars Matter era, you would break down rosters from 1 to 85.
Yep.
And a lot of these teams in these.
The thing is though, 50 to 85 don't play, so it doesn't matter.
The point. Yeah. It's you got to break down top 40.
Yeah.
Or top 30 because those are the players who are on the field playing. If you have a 5-star quarterback and freshman, 8 5-star freshmen on your roster, you could skew the numbers on team total talent addition, but that doesn't really have a thumbprint on what's going on the field.
I think the better measure now is how many NFL players are on your roster.
Yeah.
And I think because if you go back to Michigan last year,
yeah, they're the
that's a great way to measure that Michigan team because it's not about what they signed, although they had a couple of 5-stars.
Yeah.
But they had the most NFL talent on their roster of anybody at the end of last season.
Yeah, and then you go down that rabbit hole though, and it's just how many first rounders do you have? How many because Ohio State, and Michigan last year.
If we play that game right now, I do think Ohio State and Oregon probably are coming out on top.
Yeah, I think Ohio State
Ohio State is one of in that measure probably.
I don't know. I'd have to go look this up because I haven't done it yet. Michigan broke draft records last year, so they had a ton of players.
They didn't end up breaking the record,
but it was
one of the Georgia teams still has it,
right?
Or maybe the 2019.
But the point I'm going to make is that if you add up all the players who have played in that game last year that they lost in, if Ohio State will end up having more first-day players or first two-day players.
Because that was what Nick Saban's Alabama and Kirby Smart's Georgia always had over everybody else. They had
Ryan Williams.
It's not just that they get the guys drafted. They're getting the guys drafted first, second, third rounds.
Well, they have guys on the team that are it's not just NFL guys who's going to make a roster or be a 5th-round draft pick. It was dudes that were being taken in the top 10 who could literally lift a refrigerator.
And now if you look at the mock drafts now, look at how spread out
it is.
The first round talent is. And I think that's what's happening. And it's fascinating to watch. It's going to be really interesting to see once the playoff begins. And I realize I'm seeing the chat. I know everybody wants us to say the fix was in. I don't think the fix was in. If they screwed up and it was targeting, they screwed up, but they looked at that play for 5 minutes to determine whether it was a fumble or not. Yeah. If they thought they saw targeting, I think they would have called it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not even going to talk like it.
Now they did miss a hold, and the other one was they called PI. I think the ball was tipped.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was definitive, but I think the ball was tipped.
Bailed out Georgia Tech on a PI in the back of the end zone.
That was PI.
No, I'm just saying, if it was rigged, they wouldn't be calling game altering pass interference plays with the game on the line. It's the same thing that they were doing with Miami all year. Yeah,
I don't think the fix was in.
I hope not.
That's a crew led by a referee who's worked the national championship game.
Yeah.
By the way, while working for the ACC, not working for the SEC at that time.
Yeah. So anyway, well, it's going going to be a really, really good day.
Yeah, we're going to the Texas A&M game. So, guys, before we go, I want to show you. I did say I wanted to see this live. I have now seen Ari riding on his stomach live. Here's a screenshot. Look at this. So
look at my ass is out. Thanks, man.
Well, your ass is not out. That's right. There's more
midriff.
Your midriff.
I thought you were going to show them the fireplace video.
His laptop is over here. Oh, I'm sure that too. Okay. So we have done a little home improvement. Ari has a fire pit that he was afraid to use. I showed him how to buy a propane tank at Home Depot.
Yeah.
And then we got the thing lit, and
a cute little mandate.
It was lit. Britt, look at what your husband did. Look at this. Look at this man. Look at this man who made fire.
I made fire. Okay.
He is Prometheus. So, Ari, do you know, by the way, bad job by me producing this segment, but
I think it's a wonderful job.
Do you know?
Keep my ass out.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that picture up.
Leave that there.
Do you know, by the way, what happened to Prometheus?
I don't even know who that is.
The Titan god, whatever. It's hard to say what he
was. It like
I can't remember if he's a Titan
Roman
or
Empire thing.
This is Greek mythology.
Yeah, Greek mythology.
Gave man fire. Zeus had him chained to the side of a rock, and has like a bird picking at his liver, his exposed liver, over and over again.
My exposed liver was on that couch about an hour ago.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, it has been quite a night. 8 overtimes in Georgia and Georgia Tech. Georgia survives 44-42. Lots of games tomorrow. Clemson, South Carolina, Notre Dame, USC, the Iron Bowl, Texas A&M and Texas in Kyle Field, College Station. I couldn't decide which one I wanted to say.
In Kyle Field.
In Kyle Field, which is in College Station. That is where we'll be. And of course, we'll be talking to you after the big results, and 11:30 p.m. Eastern, Saturday night, we will attempt to make sense of it all right here on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.